Okay, so I'm gonna go share screen, and then this will be digestive one. I'll probably split this into two parts. Um, so this is digestive system. So this is for test 6. It'll be digestive, urinary system, and the reproductive system. So digestive will probably be split into two. So functions of the digestive system. So digestion is mechanical and chemical breakdown of material. Um, Motility, that's just simply movement of material from the oral cavity through to the anus and out. So basically from when you swallow the food till it goes through your intestines, that movement is called peristalsis when it's moving through uh, the digestive system. Secretion, there's a lot of exocrine release of enzymes into the lumen of the digestive tract. We'll get to that. Absorption, so that's movement of material from the lumen into the bloodstream. So if I just said, name 4 functions of the digestive system, you just got digestion, motility, secretion, absorption. And then, be able to do like a little 1-sentence blurb, describing them. The alimentary, sometimes I hear it pronounced alimentary, canal or the GI tract is a continuous tube. It's about 30 feet in length. And basically the big parts are the oral cavity, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestines, large intestines, and the rectum. And then you go anus and out. So the accessory organs, it's anything that's connected with this. Mainly, I think of accessory organs as like salivary glands, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, but in your book, they even include teeth and tongue, which I guess technically that's correct. Um, Now, this is what kind of drives the student a little bit nuts here. So there's 4 layers, and probably you shouldn't go, scratch this out, don't go superficial to deep uh, because technically you're going from inside to outside. So scratch out superficial and deep. That's kind of a bad description there. So the tunica so tunica, right? So you got 4 tunics, and you have this in the esophagus, you have it in the stomach, you have these 4 in the small intestines and the large intestines. So the innermost layer is called the tunica mucosa. The next layer is called the tunica submucosa. The next layer is muscle, so it's called tunica muscularis externa, and then you have tunica serosa. All right, so we'll look at those a little up close. So here's the small intestine. So everything I'm touching right here with a cursor on the inside is tunica mucosa. Okay, so if you look, even including this little piece of this little strip of muscle right here, everything from there to the lumen, all of that is tunica mucosa. Now, let's just look at some of these structures. So these big folds, those are called plica or plica. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I don't care. Just spell it right. Um, and the little projections on there, they're pretty big, but I mean, they're kind of small. Those are the villi. Don't call them microvilli. Microvilli are tiny, tiny, tiny. That's on the surface of cells. These are villi. So they're, you can kind of see them. They're fairly big. So that's what we're looking at here. So we're looking at a plica or a plica, right? And so we're just kind of zoomed out. So what they did, they cut this right here and they blew it up here, and that's what you're looking at. So this would be the submucosa. It's mainly connective tissue. There's some blood vessels and stuff in there. It could be glands. Here's your layer of muscle, right? And in this case, you have 2 subdivisions, right? So this is muscularis externa, right? And then the outside part, it's your visceral peritoneal membrane, a little bit of connective tissue right there also. That's your tunica serosa. So this epithelium here, which, by the way, is simple columnar. And then this little bit of lamina propria connectivity tissue-y stuff here, and this little strip of muscle, all of that is your tunica mucosa. Under it, which technically you're going to the outside, is the submucosa, and then the tunica muscularis externa here, and then the tunica serosa here. Now, we'll talk a little more about serosa because there is one place around the esophagus where it's not a serosa, it's an adventitia, but we'll get to that later. Don't stress on it right now. So tunica mucosa is the mucous membrane, and it's the moist epithelial tissue and the loose connective tissue, adjacent to that. So tunica submucosa is mainly areolar connective tissue. It can be some glands. Tunica muscularis externa, generally you have 2 subdivisions, but in the stomach you have 3, right? And we'll talk about that. Tunica serosa, it's basically that little, it's that little serous membrane on the outside, except for in the esophagus and the rectum, it's adventitia. So it's more connective tissue-y there. This sarcomere arrangement doesn't happen in smooth muscle. So remember the way you had sarcomeres in skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle? Not so in smooth. You still have contractile proteins, but they're arranged differently. So it doesn't give you that effect, of sarcomeres. You do have gap junctions, and it's arranged in sheets, and it can stretch. So just because of the way it's put together, you can stretch a muscle cell. I think your book says 2.4 times its length, normal length, and it still has almost all the contractile force. Where if you did that with skeletal muscle or cardiac muscle, basically you'd pull the sarcomeres apart, and so it wouldn't work. Okay? 2 forms of contraction, peristalsis and segmentation. We'll talk about that a little bit. Peristalsis is net movement of the material towards the rectum. So there's little food bolas or whatever, and then it's going in that direction, right? And so this is just showing you how that's accomplished. Where segmentation, there's no movement. Net movement is more like just a grinding and mixing. And so that's just 2 different things that can happen in the intestines or in the digestive system. Enteric nervous system, don't stress on this too much, but you do have a bunch of basically neural input and you have reflexes basically that can control the digestive process. So this is kind of independent from your brain. So you don't have to think about digestion, right? It just happens. And that's why in paraplegics, even though they've had a spinal cord injury, they can still most usually, if you give them food, it'll just go right through their digestive system normally because of these reflexes. So anyway, the visceral parietal peritoneum, it has foldings that help suspend the organs. So let's just look at the 5 right now. Falciform ligament, greater omentum, lesser omentum, mesenteric proper, and the mesocolon. So this makes a lot more sense when you can see them. So the falciform ligament, they didn't draw it very well here. I'll show you better on another place. But it's basically this connective tissue that's hanging the liver down, right? And so it's on the superior anterior aspect. So that would be the falciform ligament. Okay, so that's where I point at it. I don't like to point at it in cross section, especially or in a sagittal section, because they drew it so badly here. Anyway, Okay, so that's one. Remember, falciform ligament. Whoop, falciform ligament. Now, greater omentum. I don't have a good picture of that on this. If you look right here, this is the stomach. So you're in a sagittal view. You cut across the stomach, right? This sheet of connective tissue, and there's fat embedded in it usually also, that hangs down and then comes back up and connects to the transverse colon right here. That's the greater omentum. And it'll make more sense. Well, it's a shame we're not doing dissections right now, but you can really see it on the cats. But it's like a sheet that hangs down from the greater curvature of the stomach down, and then it comes back up. It's almost like a curtain, where the lesser omentum is just this little piece that's going from the liver to the stomach, and it's hanging the stomach in place there. So that's the lesser omentum. That's actually a good place to point it, lesser omentum. This is greater omentum. I have that in better detail on another slide. Okay, let's see if I can find it. So, in other words, that greater omentum, it's cut off of here. You don't see it, but it's hanging down off of this greater curvature, and it's covering all this up. So when you open up a cat or human cadaver, and it'll be a layer of, it'll just look like fat, but you can peel it away like a curtain, and then you see all the digestive, organs under it. It's just like a sheet that hangs down. Can't really see it here, where the lesser omentum would be right here, connecting these two guys. So don't forget, falciform ligament, lesser omentum, and greater omentum here is cut off. Okay, that leaves two things. Go back. Mesentery proper. And this one is really hard to visualize unless you see it in real life, like on a cat. I'll probably direct you to some YouTube videos where you can see this properly. But basically, if you took these intestines and you grab them and then you pull them kind of apart from each other, these small intestines, it would be springy. It's almost like a clear elastic sheet that's in between all these parts, and it's holding them together, and it's called mesenteries, or mesentery proper. And that's, if you remember, the superior mesenteric artery, the inferior mesenteric artery, those branch and the blood vessels flow through those mesenteries to these organs. Okay. And then the mesocolon, here they took all the intestines out, right? The sheet that's holding the colon to the back wall, basically, that's the mesocolon. Okay. This is about the best way they can draw it here. That's your mesentery proper. See the way it's hanging all of these intestines down from them. Okay. And then so all this is kind of movable. So say a woman gets pregnant, right? Here's the uterus. We'll get to that on reproductive. You know, this is going to all get pushed up, as the pregnancy develops. And we'll have pictures of that on when we get to reproductive. All right, so let's just look at the big parts. There's obviously the oral cavities here, and you got your salivary glands. That's a parotid, submandibular, sublingual. We'll get to those later. And those are paired. You got one on each side of those. And then, so here you go down remember your oropharynx, laryngopharynx, down into the esophagus, right? And there's the stomach. And then you're going to have the small intestines. It's divided into three. We'll talk about that later. And then these are going to empty into the colon, or the large intestine, right? And so then you're going to have a little area here called the cecum. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Then you're going to have ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid's kind of got a little S shape, and then rectum, anus, and out. Okay. Salivary glands, they release secretions, right? Stimulated by parasympathetic, because that's part of your rest and digest, when you're eating. it helps lubricate the oral cavity. You got your, we talked about them before, parotid glands, the submandibular glands, and then the sublingual. Submandibular actually makes most of the saliva. We'll talk about these more in depth on digestive too. But these are the teeth, right? The adult's teeth, our adult teeth. Generally, you have 32, right? Sometimes you're missing them. Sometimes you can even have extra ones, but as a general rule, 32, right? That's including your wisdom teeth, right? These third molars in the back. So what do we need to know on the test? Just know these are incisors, right? Boom, 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 boom. You don't even have to know centrals versus laterals, but it's easy to figure out. This is your cuspid. Your they also call them the canines, right? And then these are your bicuspids because they generally have two cusps on them. Two cusps on them. And then here's your molars. So that's about all I'm interested in. Make sure you know incisors from cuspid, from bicuspids are premolars. They call them premolars also, versus molars. So I go, what kind of tooth is that? Molar. What kind of tooth is that? Premolar or bicuspid. What about that one? Cuspid. If you said K9, you get credit, and then your incisors. Okay, and we'll talk more about those later. 20 baby teeth, yeah, you can call them baby teeth, but it's better to go deciduous. Generally, you have 20, and then those fall out and are replaced, and you get some extras, and then those are